Canaan was, during the late 2nd millennium BC, a region in the ancient Near East. In the Bible it corresponds to the Levant. In particular the areas of the southern Levant that are the main setting of the narrative of the Hebrew Bible, i.e., the area of Israel, Phoenicia, Philistia, and other nations. The name Canaan is used commonly in the Hebrew Bible, with particular definition in references Genesis chapter 10 and Numbers chapter 34, where the land of Canaan extends from Lebanon southward to the Brook of Egypt, and eastward to the Jordan River Valley. References to Canaan in the Bible are usually backward-looking, referring to a region that had become something else. The term Canaanites is by far the most frequently used ethnic term in the Bible, in which they are commonly described as a people who had been annihilated by the Israelites. Archaeological attestation of the name Canaan in ancient Near Eastern sources is almost exclusively during the period in which the region was a colony of the New Kingdom of Egypt, with usage of the name almost disappearing following the Late Bronze Age collapse. The references suggest that during this period the term was familiar to the region's neighbors on all sides, although it has been disputed to what extent such references provide a coherent description of its location and boundaries, and regarding whether the inhabitants used the term to describe themselves. The Amarna letters and other cuneiform documents use Kinahu, while other sources of the Egyptian New Kingdom mention numerous military campaigns conducted in Canaan. The name Canaanites is attested, many centuries later, as the endonym of the people later known to the ancient Greeks from c. 500 BC as Phoenicians, and following the emigration of Canaanite speakers to Carthage, was also used as a self-designation by the Punics during late antiquity. This mirrors later usage in later books of the Hebrew Bible, such as at the end of the book of Zechariah, where it is thought to refer to a class of merchants or to non-monotheistic worshippers in Israel or neighboring Sidon and Tyre, as well as in its single independent usage in the New Testament, where it is alternated for Syrophoenician in two parallel passages. Canaan was of significant geopolitical importance in the Late Bronze Age Amarna period as the area where the spheres of interest of the Egyptian, Hittite, and Assyrian empires converged. Much of the modern knowledge about Canaan stems from archaeological excavation in this area at sites such as Tel Hazer, Tel Megiddo, and Gezer. Canaanite culture apparently developed in situ from the Circum-Arabian nomadic pastoral complex, which in turn developed from a fusion of Near Eastern Haraphan hunter-gatherers with pre-pottery Neolithic bee farming cultures, practicing animal domestication. During the 6200 BC climatic crisis, the Late Bronze Age state of Ugarit is considered quintessentially Canaanite archaeologically, even though its Ugaritic language does not belong to the Canaanite group proper. Etymology. The English term Canaan comes from the Hebrew, via Greek chi alpha nu Canaan and Latin Canaan. It appears as Kirkin Narana in the Amarna letters, and not Sen is found on coins from Phoenicia in the last half of the first millennium. It first occurs in Greek in the writings of Hecataeus as Khna. Scholars connect the name Canaan with Nots N, Canaan, the general northwest Semitic name for this region. The etymology is uncertain. An early explanation derives the term from the Semitic root nots, to be low, humble, subjugated. Some scholars have suggested that this implies an original meaning of lowlands, in contrast with Aram, which would then mean highlands, whereas others have suggested it meant the subjugated, as the name of Egypt's province in the Levant, and evolved into the proper name in a similar fashion to Provincia Nostra. An alternative suggestion put forward by Ephraim Avidor Spicer in 1936 derives the term from Huron Kinahu, purportedly referring to the color purple, so that Canaan and Phoenicia would be synonyms. Tablets found in the Huron city of Nuzi in the early 20th century appear to use the term Canaan as a synonym for red or purple dye, laboriously produced by the Kassite rulers of Babylon from murex shells as early as 1600 BC, and on the Mediterranean coast by the Phoenicians from a byproduct of glass-making. Purple cloth became a renowned Canaanite export commodity which is mentioned in Exodus. The dyes may have been named after their place of origin. The name Phoenicia is connected with the Greek word for purple, apparently referring to the same product, but it is difficult to state with certainty whether the Greek word came from the name or vice versa. The purple cloth of Tyre in Phoenicia was well known far and wide and was associated by the Romans with nobility and royalty. However, according to Robert Drews, Spice's proposal has generally been abandoned. Canaan in the Bible. Canaan in the Hebrew Bible. In biblical usage, the name was confined to the country west of the Jordan. Canaanites were described as living by the sea, and along by the side of the Jordan, and was especially identified with Phoenicia. The Philistines, while an integral part of the Canaanite milieu, do not seem to have been ethnic Canaanites, and were listed in the Table of Nations as descendants of Mizraim. The Arameans, Moabites, Ammonites, Midianites and Edomites were also considered fellow descendants of Shem or Abraham, and distinct from generic Canaanites. Amorites. Heth, representing the Hittites, is a son of Canaan. The later Hittites spoke an Indo-European language, but their predecessors the Hattians had spoken a little-known language, of uncertain affinities. The Horites, formerly of Mount Si, were implied to be Canaanite, although unusually there is no direct confirmation of this in the narrative. The Hurons based in northern Mesopotamia, who spoke a language isolate, were initially regarded by Bible scholars as akin to the Horites, though this is no longer the case. In the Bible, the renaming of land of Canaan as the land of Israel marks the Israelite conquest of the Promised Land. Canaan and the Canaanites are mentioned some 160 times in the Hebrew Bible, mostly in the Pentateuch and the books of Joshua and Judges. Canaan first appears as one of Noah's grandsons during the narrative known as the Curse of Ham, in which Canaan is cursed with perpetual slavery because his father Ham had looked upon the drunken naked Noah. God later promises the land of Canaan to Abraham, and eventually delivers it to descendants of Abraham, the Israelites. The biblical history has become increasingly problematic as the archaeological and textual evidence supports the idea that the early Israelites were, in fact, themselves Canaanites. The Hebrew Bible lists borders for the land of Canaan. Numbers chapter 34 verse 2 includes the phrase, the land of Canaan, as defined by its borders. The borders are then delineated in Numbers chapter 34 verses 3 to 12. The term, Canaanites, in biblical Hebrew is applied especially to the inhabitants of the lower regions, along the seacoast and on the shores of Jordan, as opposed to the inhabitants of the mountainous regions. By the time of the Second Temple, Canaanite, in Hebrew had come to be not an ethnic designation, so much as a general synonym for merchant, as it is interpreted in, for example, Job chapter 40 verse 30, or Proverbs chapter 31 verse 24. John N. Oswalt notes that Canaan consists of the land west of the Jordan and is distinguished from the area east of the Jordan. Oswalt then goes on to say that in Scripture Canaan takes on a theological character, as the land which is God's gift, and the place of abundance. The Hebrew Bible describes the Israelite conquest of Canaan in the former prophets, viz. the books of Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. These 5 books of the Old Testament canon give the narrative of the Israelites after the death of Moses and Joshua, leading them into Canaan. In 586 BC, the Israelites in turn lost the land to the Babylonians. These narratives of the former prophets are also part of a larger work, called the Deuteronomistic History. Canaanites in the Hebrew Bible. The passage in the book of Genesis, often called the Table of Nations, describes the Canaanites as being descended from an ancestor called Canaan, the son of Ham and grandson of Noah, saying, Canaan is the father of Sidon, his firstborn, and of the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Arkites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, and Hamathites. Later the Canaanite clans scattered, and the borders of Canaan reached across the Mediterranean coast, from Sidon toward Gerar as far as Gaza, and then inland around the Jordan Valley, toward Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, as far as Lasha. The Sidon whom the table identifies as the firstborn son of Canaan has the same name as that of the coastal city of Sidon, in Lebanon. This city dominated the Phoenician coast, and may have enjoyed hegemony over a number of ethnic groups, who are said to belong to the land of Canaan. Similarly, Canaanite populations are said to have inhabited the Mediterranean coastlands, including Lebanon corresponding to Phoenicia and the Gaza Strip corresponding to Philistia. The Jordan Valley. The Canaanites are said to have been one of 7 regional ethnic divisions or nations driven out by the Israelites following the Exodus. Specifically, the other nations include the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. According to the Book of Jubilees, the Israelite conquest of Canaan is attributed to Canaan's steadfast refusal to join his elder brothers in Ham's allotment beyond the Nile, and instead, squatting on the eastern shores of the Mediterranean, within the inheritance delineated for Shem. Canaan thus incurs a further curse from Noah for disobeying the agreed apportionment of land. One of the 613 mitzvot prescribes that no inhabitants of the cities of 6 Canaanite nations, the same as mentioned in 7:1, minus the Girgashites, were to be left alive. While the Hebrew Bible contrasts the Canaanites ethnically from the ancient Israelites, modern scholars Jonathan Tubb and Mark Smith have theorized the kingdoms of Israel and Judah to be a subset of Canaanite culture, based on their archaeological and linguistic interpretations. Canaan in the New Testament. Canaan is used only 3 times in the New Testament. Twice in Acts when paraphrasing Old Testament stories, and once in the exorcism of the Syrophoenician woman's daughter. The latter story is told by both Matthew and Mark. Matthew uses the term Chananiah, where Mark calls the woman Syrophoenician. Strong's Concordance describes the term Chananiah as, in Christ's time, equivalent to Phoenician. Greco-Roman historiography. The Greek term, Phoenicia, is first attested in the first 2 works of Western literature, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. It does not occur in the Hebrew Bible, but occurs 3 times in the New Testament in the Book of Acts. In the 6th century BC, Hecataeus of Miletus affirms that Phoenicia was formerly called Kainu Alpha, a name that Philo of Byblos subsequently adopted into his mythology as his eponym for the Phoenicians. Khna, who was afterwards called Phoenix. Quoting fragments attributed to Sanchuniathon, he relates that Byblos, Berytus and Tyre were among the first cities ever built under the rule of the mythical Cronus, and credits the inhabitants with developing fishing, hunting, agriculture, shipbuilding and writing. Coins of the city of Beirut, Laodicea bear the legend of Laodicea, a metropolis in Canaan. These coins are dated to the reign of Antiochus IV and his successors until 123 BC. St. Augustine also mentions that one of the terms the seafaring Phoenicians called their homeland was Canaan. Augustine also records that the rustic people of Hippo in North Africa retained the Punic self-designation Chanani. The Greeks also popularized the term Palestine, named after the Greek Philistines or the Aegean Pelasgians, for roughly the region of Canaan, excluding Phoenicia, with Herodotus' first recorded use of Palestine, California, 480 BC. From 110 BC, the Hasmoneans extended their authority over much of the region, creating a Judean, Samaritan, Idumean, Itaurian, Galilean alliance. The Judean control over the wider area resulted in it also becoming known as Judea, a term that had previously only referred to the smaller region of the Judean mountains. The allotment of the tribe of Judah and heartland of the former kingdom of Judah. Between 73–63 BC, the Roman Republic extended its influence into the region in the Third Mithridatic War, conquering Judea in 63 BC, and splitting the former Hasmonean kingdom into 5 districts. Around 130–135 CE, as a result of the suppression of the Bar Kokhba revolt, the province of Judea was joined with Galilee to form new province of Syria Palestina. There is circumstantial evidence linking Hadrian with the name change, although the precise date is not certain, and the interpretation of some scholars that the name change may have been intended to complete the dissociation with Judea is disputed. The region of former Canaan continued to be known to all parties as Palestine from 133 until 1948 with the establishment of the modern State of Israel.